In this lesson, we're going to learn about statements and questions with other verbs besides the being verbs. First, let's just review about statements in Spanish. We've learned about making a statement such as El mosquito es un insecto. And in English, this means the mosquito is an insect. Very similar structure. The other being verb that we learned is está. Okay, and we learned Roma está en Italia. And in English, of course, that means Rome is in Italy. Next, let's review how to form a question in Spanish. And if we just switch around the verb and the subject, we can say, ¿Es el mosquito un insecto? And of course, in English, that means, is the mosquito an insect? All right, we also formed a question, ¿Está Roma en Italia? Is Rome in Italy? So as you can see, so far we have learned how to make statements and questions, and the order of the sentences are very similar in Spanish and in English. Next, we're going to learn how to make statements with verbs other than es or está. So let's first, let's talk about something besides a mosquito. So that's going to be our subject. Let's just say we will talk about an artist. El artista. That's kind of an odd word because it ends with an A, but yet you're using the masculine article el. So it's just one of those irregular situations. El artista. Anyway, that's our subject. And let's just say we're going to use some other verb besides es or está, and say the artist paints. So the verb for paints in Spanish would be pinta. So the entire Spanish sentence would be El artista pinta, which means in Spanish, the artist paints. To show this with a little drawing, we will say El artista pinta. The artist paints. Let's talk about how to make statements negative. They're also known as negations. And we will go back to using the same sentence that we just made in the previous section. El artista pinta. The artist paints. All we have to do is add the little word no. No. El artista no pinta. And this means in English, the artist doesn't paint. Finally, we'll talk about how to make questions in Spanish. The first way that you can make a question is by changing your intonation. By that I mean, let's look at El artista pinta. As it stands, that's a sentence. Just a simple statement. El artista pinta. You should have a punctuation there, sorry. El artista pinta. Simple sentence. Well, now let's change that by just simply making the intonation of our voice into an upward tilt, making your intonation into a question. El artista pinta. Of course, then that's going to become a question. El artista pinta. Oops, I lost my E. El artista pinta. Okay, so all I did was I changed the intonation of my voice and I changed the punctuation marks. So it was the same exact sentence as before, el artista pinta. But then I changed my intonation, it became el artista pinta. The second way you can make a question in Spanish is to add a tag to the end of the statement. For example, if we just simply say el artista pinta, the artist paints, and we tag on a little question at the end, ¿verdad? The artist paints, right? That's one way. Or if we say el artista pinta and then tag on no es verdad, which means the artist paints. Isn't it true? Now the third way of making a question in Spanish is the most commonly used way. It's to invert the order of the subject and the verb so that the question begins with the verb. Let me explain. So let's go back to el artista pinta. The artist paints. Let me put that in English. The artist paints. That's our statement. Now, when I say to invert the order of the subject and the verb, what we're going to do is we're going to switch. We're going to take the verb, pinta, we're going to put it first. Then we're going to take the subject, el artista, and we're going to put it second. Then we can add our question mark. Put our little upside down question mark in the beginning over here. And there you have it. We've taken the verb and put it first, and taken the subject and put it second. This is the third way and most commonly used way of making a question in Spanish. Just switch the subject and verb order. So we will read pinta el artista. Of course, you're going to want to make this a capital, make this lowercase. So you'll end up with something like this. Pinta el artista. Now, to you and I, it would look like this sentence should be translated as paints the artist, or paints the artist. Well, we would want to say, does the artist paint? Or is the artist painting? But it's not, this is what we would want to say. Does the artist paint? Or is the artist painting? Because this kind of looks weird to us. Many years of speaking English, it's difficult for us to automatically begin a question with the verb. Paints the artist? It kind of sounds like Yoda. Paints the artist? Well, it's because Spanish doesn't have words like does or is. And so you kind of have to get used to thinking of a question in Spanish and starting with the verb. Okay? So, pinta el artista. And what we want to say here is, does the artist paint or is the artist painting? But again, we don't have does, we don't have is. We just have to say, pinta el artista. One helpful way to remember this is to think of the old-fashioned English way. Do you remember ba ba black sheep? Have you any wool? Okay, so you would put the verb first. Have you any wool? And really what that means is, do you have any wool? Okay, or maybe in the King James Bible, if you would recall a sentence like, understandest thou? And what we want to say is, do you understand? And then finally, another Bible example would be, know ye not? Again, the verb is first, know ye not? But what we're really saying here is, don't you know?